All right, welcome to the Business of Social podcast powered by STN Digital. I am David Brickley, and on the Business of Social, we examine the digital advertising industry and analyze how brands successfully increase their ad revenue and brand affinity through cutting-edge content on social. In short, we talk to the experts so you're able to keep your thumb on the pulse of the ever-changing landscape of social and digital media. He's been a marketing manager for the New York Knicks, the director of digital marketing at Michigan University, Go Blue, and has spent over 3 years as a director of digital marketing and communications at Big Ten Network. He was also kind enough to treat me to a childhood dream of mine, go see the Cubs at the historic Wrigley Field, which I can't thank him enough for. But ladies and gentlemen, one of the GOATs of sports digital, please welcome Big Ten Network's Jordan Maleh. Jordan, what's going on, man?
What's going on, David? Thank you for having me, my man.
Absolutely. Excited to jump into it and just talk shop a little bit. I think you more than anybody understand live sports, and I think in 2018, as we look ahead in the future and where live sports is going with linear, OTT, I would love just to start there, and I think the industry of live sports and where you think it's going.
Yeah, absolutely. So, clearly, we are a rights holder. Obviously, that's the kind of the competitive advantage that we have. So we are clearly in the live sports game. I think, from our end, we are in a great position, obviously. And, as the conversation in the media kind of has unfolded, where it's kind of ranging from, subs are going down, OTT subscribers are going up. How many of those subscribers are actually watching versus just, signing up, registering? So from our end, we are focused on live sports. That is clearly our bread and butter. We have clearly, we were kind of the leader in the space when it comes to streaming with BTN to Go and launching that, one of the first streaming apps to ultimately produce and stream live games. Now 10 years later, after we first launched, clearly the landscape and the nature of the industry has changed. From our end, we are now clearly with a joint venture of Fox. Where we see it is probably a closer connection to Fox and Fox Sports Go as it relates to streaming. From an over-the-top perspective, right? Big Ten Network being available now on over-the-top opportunities, which clearly, if we had this conversation 2 years ago, it probably wouldn't have been brought up. But being available on YouTube TV, being available on Hulu. So I think that, that part of the landscape clearly is not going to change. We are clearly focused on our subscriber base and clearly cable from that end. So I think from my personal perspective, I think the numbers may be a little bit over the top, pun intended, when it comes to kind of the subscriber base decreasing. But the beauty for us, right, is we have the fans, right? We have live sports. People are watching live sports versus, again, everyone knows you're not watching live sports on delay. So we feel, again, we're in a great position to succeed looking ahead.
I want to get your general take, because I think what's most fascinating about live sports and linear and OTT is the business model for so long, what are we talking, 50, 60 years, has been to buy the rights of the product and then be able to leverage that product to sell to advertisers in a linear fashion, whether it be a 30-second ad or a presenting sponsor. And we know where it's going the next 10 to 15 years in terms of people, Apple TV and OTT and making it more user-friendly. How do you navigate, in your opinion, when it comes to linear and live sports to transition to where it's going digitally and OTT, but at the same time respecting the bread and butter that has really got the network there in the first place?
Yeah, I think that's what I think about every day now, taking the digital perspective of it first, right? So, as a rights holder, we also own the ancillary rights, right? So technically, we own essentially everything revolving and aligning with a school.
Gotcha.
So From our perspective is, all right, so how do we kind of extend the window, if you will, of live sports, right? What can we do maybe from more of a sideline perspective, or are there pregame shows going on that are going on campus that we can kind of tie into? We need to be able to better, have a better opportunity to sell our digital opportunities. So as we get a little bit more focus on campus opportunities, what can we how can we tie in advertisers there? And I think that's it's still so young in terms of digital social, right? What are people looking at? Do impressions mean something? Do views mean something? Does the community really mean the most? So it's funny, and again, everyone has a different perspective on it. I think we need to get in the position where we always think about this: how are we maximizing our rights, not only from an over the top perspective, but from a digital and social perspective. And right now, from my position, really, really working hard to in advance of the next kind of academic and fiscal year of how we view those digital and social components, and how do we go to the market and sell those, and what are sponsors interested in, which I think no one has the silver bullet. If we did, then there wouldn't probably be as many opinions on it as there are.
Right. And I'll fast forward to this question I was going to ask you is, television, the advertising market in television, about an $80 billion industry. And, what I foresee is over the next 5-10 years, that money to start to sink into digital simply because the Fortune 5s will eventually go where the eyeballs are. But how far do you think we are away from a Gillette, rather than spending 80% of their budget on television at a home, to start to steal away from that and become more digital and understand that the eyeballs are the exact same or even more than maybe your traditional 30-second spot?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as we have this conversation and the Super Bowl is 2 days away, I think, you look away from the Super Bowl and you look at the actual landscape. That's the question. I think we see it from our end where, the percentages of people who are streaming, right, are continue to rise, clearly not to the scale of viewership in the traditional manner, but those percentages are rising. And as you kind of focus on, right, the average minute audience, what are properties selling against? And I also think about when the Gillette and the brands understand where the consumption is taking place. I agree with you, and I think we're in a good position again because our answer is easy. We have live sports. People are consuming it on the go, not only at home in the traditional space. So I think yes, it'll definitely continue to rise, and I think as the way that ultimately brands and Big Ten Network included, how we sell against digital and social, and not just your standard 30-second spot. Here's how many households you're going to reach. That's going to be even more dominant in the space than, all right, traditional pre-roll, the notion of mid-roll, post-roll. What does branded content actually mean? Because I just don't think, right, where it hasn't, the space just hasn't been mature enough where Nielsen can come in and say, hey, these are households. This is what you sell against, right? No one really has said, these are total views. This is what you sell against. Here's what a CPM is in the world of digital. And that CPM changes based off the scale of X brand. So I think that's the challenge of it. And I think that's what's most fun about the space that we're in right now.
And I think it's funny because Nielsen has always been the North Star for every television network. But even Nielsen, I think we both can agree, is really not an exact science, right? They're following a select group of people, and then there are times in that by market. So I think as we get into this digital age, people are looking for that that recipe that gives you the perfect. And I think digital will give you more, be able to track that a little bit more. But even in the television industry, Nielsen hasn't been an exact science yet. Everybody agrees, okay, let's use this metric to dictate price and views.
Absolutely. And even I think where we're going now in terms of actually, Nielsen being able to track not just your traditional sense, right? Traditional household, but getting to your average minute audience, getting to what ESPN has picked up, what Fox has picked up in terms of a more aggregate kind of in terms of consumption. So I think we're heading in that direction, and I also think Nielsen, in terms of their traditional and also social and digital capacity, is also building, as we are clearly a partner of Nielsen as well.
And you're talking about Nielsen's total audience rating that they're rolling out?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think from our end, we're not there yet. It's clearly a conversation we've had internally, but it's definitely top of mind here at BTN.
Yeah, so as we move from streaming to your digital properties like Facebook and Twitter and really leveraging your audiences on those major core networks, I think you guys did an amazing job with the Libman sponsorship during the Big Ten basketball tournament last year, and even really making that well-executed branded content, cleaning the glass, which was the block of the day, presented by Libman rather than just slapping a logo on it. So the way you guys did that was really clean. And since we are in the infancy, how does that's, you guys are unique in that way where you're starting to get those type of sponsorships here in 2017, 2018. How does that work? Because you mentioned before, is it views? Is it impressions? Is it checkouts? Is it website visits? Or how do you begin to start to at least put that package together on your end?
Yeah, it's a great example, and I didn't know much about Libman before. Now
you do.
Most people know they're the green mop company who wipes up courts at every Big Ten school and across the country. Libman, it was a great client because they're open to new ideas, right? The perfect sense, and I wish, to be honest, most clients were like Libman, right? They were open to. They had a really, really detailed plan of, all right, we want basketball during March, right? We can't get the NCAA tournament, so what can we get that's kind of, I guess, next to that? And that was their goal. And from our end, we were just churning, right? The ideas of, as you mentioned, right, cleaning the glass, the Mop 5. So we got our puns going, which we love to do. And they were interested clearly not only in highlights, but also custom content. And the way that we attacked that was just simply number of activations. So they were, purchasing highlights via Twitter Amplify. And then ultimately, how many pieces of custom content could we produce? And that was the number we were looking at. Clearly we want to shy away from delivering X number of impressions, X number of engagements. That's not probably the best game to be in right now, especially for us considering where we are in terms of the scale. So we pitched ideas to Libman, and they were open to the majority of all of them. I think we were testing out kind of the mop cam, right? And we were testing out 360 cameras from a Facebook perspective and a Twitter perspective via Periscope. And most importantly, Libman kind of took a risk and took a chance with us. And highlights, they're easy to understand, but everything else was not really easy to kind of understand and consume and really understand how successful it was going to be. And Libman ultimately was our first digital only sponsor, right? So they last year,
that's big,
during the basketball tournament, they had no linear opportunities. They weren't interested at that point. So this year they're back, so you can kind of sense if it was successful or not. And they're also introducing some TV elements, but the Mop 5 will be back. We've introduced a little bit more, because we'll be in New York City for the Big Ten basketball tournament. Some iconic opportunities of bringing, you could foresee the Mop being taken around to the Rucker Park or West 4th and taking a picture of the Mop, and kind of letting the Mop become a legend of New York City. So we're moving forward with that, and I think that's the goal. I think it was easier for Libman, a little bit of a smaller company, if you will, right? So the opportunity to take some risks and be open to change. And we're excited to kind of explore it again later this month.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting for anybody listening because it sounds like at least in the current juncture, it's really active number of activations or pieces of content, which from ROI standpoint, technically that can mean 100 views or 1.9 million views. But it sounds like in this infancy, as we kind of go through this, that the sponsors are okay with just a well-executed campaign with the set number of deliverables, rather than, like you said, we guarantee we're going to have, 1 billion in potential reach with this campaign.
Yeah, and I think that's where we are, right? That's the space. It's still so young, and that's what we try to tackle every day. And it's just came up earlier today of how different companies view social ROI. Like, what is social ROI? For teams, it may be different, right? Because they're maybe more based on the community. From our end, it definitely probably tends to be, it needs to be ad sales. It needs to be revenue generated, because we're investing in these products. We're investing to make the content, and we obviously need to see the return on that. So I do think we get to I think the clear cut where both sides understand, right? I think some of it is the other side of, the sales team up from their end, or the brand itself kind of has a good understanding of what social truly is, versus kind of have the linear kind of lens on. And how do we ultimately get to an impression number or a view number? Because again, from a streaming side, we are selling households, we are selling streams, so there is a guarantee there. I think, again, still young in the space, but if there's a number of activations and you maybe top that with a suggested window of impressions and or views, I think you're playing the game. I would probably lean more towards a mix of both, because again, we all know a view is that a view, or is that kind of a BS model? We don't know, but at least everyone's playing off the same rules in that space.
Yeah, I think you made a good point when it comes to Libman. I think for that sales guy to go to his VP and say, hey, we're involved in March Madness, one of the biggest events of the year, I think that means something, regardless of, we sold, 14,000 Libman mops because of this activation. I do think there's a little bit of that brand awareness and being connected to a brand like March Madness, like Big Ten basketball. And you guys can probably leverage that, like, hey, you're going to be a part of what everybody's talking about around the water cooler, and that's a big deal.
Yep, absolutely. And even more so this year, right, where the basketball tournament is a week earlier, right? So we are the only Power 5 basketball conference going on. So I think they're going to even have more of a kind of general voice in the game. And you're right. We can't, not every brand, some brands are different, right? They want to see that direct correlation. But some of it, when, from a branding perspective, it worked out, really, really well. And again, worked out so well that they're back, and hopefully we can get them, happy, and we can deliver again this year.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I won't give it away, but I think one example, it was a major television event, so I won't give it away, but they were essentially charging for a brand to be a part of it, $25,000 to $50,000 per tweet. Which seems incredible, especially if you're not guaranteeing whether that tweet's going to get 3 retweets or it's going to get 4.7 million retweets, but I think we're in this space, which is really interesting for you to hear, where the number of activations is really where we have to be here in 2018. And as we grow and get more data, like a Nielsen total ratings, that's when I think we'll get more into the guaranteed, and even being able to add more money or boost your posts to guarantee that minimum, I think is kind of where we're going. In terms of social specifically, I want to share a cry with you when it comes to the Facebook algorithm. Mark Zuckerberg continues to turn that puppy down, and I think it opens up a space in terms of people being able to execute on Facebook ads and really have a cohesive strategy there. But I want to get your opinion, because I think there's an opening in the space for a network or a Snapchat to come up and help more with organic reach, because the biggest platform in the game has just really turned that off for brands. Yeah.
And, we have this conversation today. They could change it tomorrow. Right. Then, it's wild. My initial reaction was, all right, again, content maybe kind of swallowed a little bit, but from a Facebook perspective, I immediately thought, ad revenue, right? And as you just mentioned, right, boosting posts, right? I think as you're talking to sports-minded people first, the some leverage that we have is we have content that is creating, an expression or an act or an action, right? Just it's natural in considering the sports landscape. But another opportunity that we thought about is the nature of groups, right? And and that was my other thought, right? You got ad revenue, but then you also have groups. And I think in the space of we've seen, I'm not a big group guy on Facebook. But if you look around the landscape, most people who are in groups are seeing group related content in their feed. And our thought is, again, we are concerned. We've never most probably like the majority of sports platforms, teams, etc. Probably haven't put all their chips on the table for Facebook. But from our end, we think we may be thinking about creating 14 respective Facebook groups, right, that live within our Facebook page. So you're thinking about, right, an Illinois Facebook group, a Iowa Facebook group, where we're, it's going to start small, and then do you question, are you putting the time and investment in building essentially a group chat, if you will, right, where you're sharing content that we clearly own the rights to, and then a year from now, the model changes and the algorithm opens up again. So that's been kind of the conversation from our end. I think from what I've read recently from a Facebook perspective, groups is clearly top of mind. But from our end, is the investment, as we talked about earlier, is there a return there enough? Because I think, yes, hypothetically it is, but are we going to see our content from our Facebook page throttled to that degree where we kind of need to pivot? I think we need to see that first. And you mentioned kind of the paid side of things. From an organic sense, and also from a more of a paid sense, I think we think about it kind of in the same family, in the same category, right? We are sharing organic content clearly, but we are also boosting from a streaming, a viewership perspective. We are clearly boosting that, so that model is not going to change. But I think the group opportunity is something that we're thinking about. We haven't seen the effects just yet, but I see clearly from the news perspective, I see people kind of reaching out and making sure you see their news first, and kind of opt into that first. So yeah, the model from our end is kind of status quo right now. I think from our end, we've probably dialed a little bit back in terms of posting video to Facebook as much as we have been, just to kind of see how the model is mapping out. But yeah, we've before this tweak, our goal was to get as much content as we can up on Facebook, as we have been part of kind of the revenue opportunities with them thus far, and we'll kind of see what the roadmap kind of entails.
So it sounds like where you guys are going is really the opt-in model, because I think as a sports fan, Zuckerberg wants you to see more of your friends and family, not necessarily 94 BuzzFeed articles, which I get. You got to make sure that the Facebook platform doesn't irritate people or turn them off. But no offense to my aunt that lives in Montana, but I'd rather see an Ohio State player dunking from the free throw line on a Thursday night rather than my aunt's post about her dog. So I do think there's something to, hey, let me opt into this, and that way I can see all this content. And I think potentially, to your point, groups can be that way, because even if I opt in as a fan to like Big Ten Network, Facebook's not going to show me your content, maybe only 1% of it, which is a problem.
And I think we're in a unique position, right? Because we're a TV network, right? So we're not the San Francisco Giants, right? We're not a team, right? So we may be seeing less chatter about a specific fan because, again, no one is a fan or is a diehard fan of BTN. They may like BTN because that's where they watch, but that's why, the model that we take from a Twitter perspective is creating 14 separate accounts where we're talking straight to the fan. And from the BTN side of things, yes, we're targeting, right? But how far would that go? So I think we're even a little bit maybe further behind the eight ball because, as you said, the opt-in for us probably makes more sense than a team, because we're trying to talk to 14 different fans, every day.
Yeah, you guys have a unique challenge because you and I have talked about a lot where if you're a Michigan diehard alum, you do not want to see Ohio State highlights. I mean, that's just something that you are probably you get sick over and want to turn away from the computer. So to your point, I think it's very self-aware of you guys to know internally, like, hey, nobody is the diehard. I love Big Ten Network so much and I love everything they produce. It's probably more based on I'm a Michigan alum. I love my Michigan and Big Ten networks where I can go to get my fix on Michigan content.
Absolutely.
Love it. So when it comes to Instagram, I think I've been a bitter old man when it comes to this because I've been talking about it a lot. But when it comes to being working in sports, as you and I do, this is getting pretty frustrating because I'm seeing 7. I mean, I think I saw Antonio Brown is active for the Steelers this morning, which is a major problem when they got eliminated 2 weeks ago. So I don't know. I want to get your thoughts on this. If Zuckerberg and Instagram is trying to force sports networks and brands to potentially stop posting unless it's evergreen. When it comes to final updates or even highlights, which really doesn't make sense. Or do you think this is something where they're going to have to eventually turn this algorithm in order to not have sports fans see this old content?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm with you, and probably everybody else in the sports landscape is with you as well. Instagram is just, it's much like the social ROI, right? It's just something you got to have to, keep beating down that door and seeing what works. From our end, we've clearly shied away from a tune-in perspective, right? Because that's either going to get lost or someone's going to see it on a Friday and the game was on a Tuesday, as you said. The tune-in, the date-specific copy has kind of, we've clearly shied away. From our end, we're trying to figure out what actually is that algorithm, right? What's going to pump through that? We clearly have highlights, right? So we have maybe a little bit of an advantage there. We're kind of first to market with the highlights. But we've seen it kind of has to be a really, really unique highlight, right? Where maybe there's something going on in a post-game press conference, player X is crying because he's so happy after a win. That may rise to the top because most people aren't sharing that maybe dunk, right? It's your average dunk. So we've seen, a few things pop, but other than that, right, the majority of content is relatively, staying at an even pace. And yeah, I think it's a little bit like, well, you can start scratching your head and trying to figure out, I've tried to dig in the data and say, should we be posting more, right? Like the House of Highlights opportunity, right? Where you talk about post. You're ultimately going to try to beat the algorithm, but are you really beating the algorithm, or is it the content? Or do you kind of slowly roll back like a la a Nike, where it's maybe more tentpole event and the cadence isn't as frequent? So I think we've tried to find a healthy mix because we just have so much content, again, that we want to get out there. But I think we've seen more so kind of the throttling of content more on Instagram than we've seen clearly on Facebook yet. But I'm an Instagram fan, but it's something that everyone kind of thinks about every single day of, is this working or is it trying to pretend like it's working? And what's it going to be like tomorrow? Because sometimes, right, we've seen during the Big Ten football championship, we saw it, right? We shared a good amount of content over a 48-hour period, and it was consumed. But if you take that model and maybe it's a Wednesday or Thursday, and it may just not work. So I'm definitely with you in terms of trying to understand that. We've tried to look at the data and kind of dig in a little bit more, and understanding maybe we slow it down. Is there a week versus weekend mentality? I don't think that's true either. But we just have to throw things against the wall, or slow it down ultimately.
Yeah, and I think the punchline so far, and we spoke for 30 minutes now. I think the punchline here is, you're damned if you, damned if you don't. When it comes to these social platforms, you have to find a way to hack it each and every month, each and every year, and it almost is like you need somewhere to live. You can rent and you can give money to a real estate broker or what have you, or you can own a home, and you can either way there, you have that 30-year mortgage. There's bad and pros and cons on both sides. So I think to pat yourself on the back a little bit, the reason why you hired Jordan Maleh with the New York Knicks background and Michigan, and someone that digs into it, is because you have to have somebody that constantly is tweaking and kind of geeks out over the process in order to make sure that you're squeezing every ounce of potential out of your brand with all these different social platforms.
Absolutely. And I think that goes back to making sure, right, as a rights holder, that's always the follow-up is, how are we maximizing our rights, right? Where we don't need to lean on the platforms themselves, right? So yes, they're a outlet, they're a distribution platform, but can we create content that we know is going to be successful no matter the algorithm, and kind of guaranteeing that revenue, versus kind of saying, hey, let's just give our content away. And for us, we're not a team. We're a rights holder. That's very important to us, and we're going to try our best to kind of maximize it.
I think since the .com era, really, email has been where you can at least control your message and own your audience. And I want to get into that a little bit, because it can be frustrating when you spend potentially hundreds. I always think about Coca-Cola, right? They probably spent $100 million getting more likes on their Facebook page, and then Zuckerberg goes, Group. And then all that money is usually, you can't reach the fans you paid so much money for. But email is something that I think seems old school, but you can control that message and you do own that audience. So I wanted to get your thoughts on how you guys attack email, and if that's still a major KPI internally for your rights.
So glad you brought it up. I'm a big CRM guy. I'm a big email guy. Probably email before social. In my previous stops at the Knicks and at Michigan, ranging from A/B testing to subject lines to graphics versus just straight copy. So I love the email CRM conversation and the notion of databases. It's funny from our perspective at BTN. We are a very lean company, and when kind of in regards to a network. So we are very light when it comes to CRM. We only really press the CRM button when we kind of have a specific kind of target in mind, like a tentpole event. I think that's one opportunity for us that, in entering this next fiscal, where we want to ramp it up. Early on, when I wasn't here, right, when the network first started, right, the opportunity was to build up a database so you can reach out to Ohio State fans and say, hey, we have Ohio State football games. Your cable provider is not offering the game. Start yelling and screaming, kicking, whatever it may be. That people did 10 years ago. They didn't tweet. But that was the target, right? So we have a database, but that is a kind of an opportunity for us moving forward. And right now, right, our attack is just based off of bandwidth and resources. We have the social digital space, and then we kind of have this this room to grow when it comes to email. But I'm with you. I can share, the examples at Michigan. It was much easier to sell into ad units because the open rate was X. And considering that you've opted in to receive a sports-specific email, right? The likelihood is you're clearly going to open that, and no matter if the banner ad is at the bottom or even at the top, you're likely to see it. So that is, I'm with you from a CRM model. For us, it's an opportunity. It just hasn't been, because again, our daily model is we're not really selling tickets. And I think that was right when I was at Michigan, when I was with the Knicks. Ticket sales and that daily grind of trying to put butts in seats was key, and understanding our audience, right? We have an understanding of who our audience is. We want to skew younger. And are we going to skew younger through email first, or are we going to skew younger or try to skew skew younger through social media, right? And I think most people would say 9 times out of 10, it's social over email and CRM first. So, but I'm with you. I'm an avid email fan.
Yeah, so I mean, you talked about opt-in and Facebook groups. I mean, maybe something along the lines of 14 teen-specific newsletters. I'm just thinking of what I do with Digiday,
Yep.
Tim Ferriss, TechCrunch. I subscribe to a digital newsletter that I really get a lot of value out of. And again, I think as people in the digital and especially in sports industry, yeah, the algorithm can get frustrating when you're and I think finding a way to control the audience more and not waking up to a Mashable headline that changes your entire department. I think a lot of people in your position are going to start looking a lot more harder at as they constantly have to evolve and adjust on an almost monthly basis. It seems like.
Absolutely. And I think that's a goal. We've had that as a goal of, we allow the fan to wake up with our content and make it school specific, right? So we take the same model we want to do on Twitter, potentially Facebook groups, and apply that via email as well. So definitely an opportunity for us moving forward.
And one other thing too with the algorithm, and I'll get off this topic, but I think let's look at the 2017 men's basketball tournament for Big Ten Network. I mean, simply with the algorithm change, let's say you guys got 50 million views on all your video on Facebook, and you go to your president and say, listen, man, we 10x'd it. We got 50 million views. Great job, Jordan. You're doing a great job. Then you come back in 2018 and your president says, how we do on Facebook? Like, we're down 25 times, 25x. And we did the same content strategy. We posted the same amount of videos, but we got 2 million instead of 50 million because of the algorithm change. Are those conversations that you have and you just have to kind of let them know how it works? So I think, especially when you're dealing with the higher ups, they may not be in the day-to-day, and it's tough to explain why we're down. And is it Jordan's fault or is it Mark Zuckerberg's fault, essentially?
Yeah, I'm with you. And it's funny because we've had those conversations just from an impressions type from Facebook. For us, we have a little bit of a head start because, right, we may see varies monthly, year over year. Just look at the football season, right? So, we may have an awesome play, right? So Penn State blocks Ohio State field goal. They go on and win that game, right? That's millions and millions of views right there. So, and then you look at this past, October or November, and maybe you don't have that big play, right? So your engagement and views are maybe already kind of a little bit volatile right there. So we always have that opportunity. And for us, again, because we're a TV network, we kind of need to rely on those big plays, but also kind of just overall tonnage. I think when we're speaking internally about tonnage, right, we just want to get as much video out there and consume, and to try to ultimately beat that algorithm and beat the ebbs and flows of highlights. So yes, and that's where, again, we need to tie the revenue to that, right? So that conversation is easier, right? So Libman, all right, well, knowing that they're in for this year, and technically, right, we're not selling against views or impressions, so we have that essentially out. We're reaching that number of activations, but if we're looking for more reach, then that's where we need to kind of get into the model of boosting that post, and are some of their ad dollars being put into the system to boost it, to try to reach a larger scale. So I think it's great, right? Because every day is kind of a learning curve, especially for the people who are kind of leading the charge, and people, right, for clearly the executive teams, to have an understanding of what's taking place. And I think from our end, we're in a good position of understanding that there's ebbs and flows in the content. But going back to the first point of what that algorithm means, probably means a little bit more ad dollars from our end.
100%. So I'll get off the algorithm, but I think that's fascinating how you really, it's a puzzle piece. Every single day you're trying to evolve and trying to move and groove and adjust based on what's going on. So it's a constant change. But I wanted to ask you this. What do you think, director of digital at a television network like Big Ten Network, if I were to say, Jordan, what's your main number one KPI, if you can give that to me? What do you think Jordan Maleh is responsible for at Big Ten Network and your number one KPI?
Yeah. So as a TV network, when I first got here, it'll be 3 years, actually, probably a few weeks here.
Crazy.
Time flies, but from our end, it clearly when I first got here it was viewership, viewership, and viewership, and obviously viewership is always going to be a TV network KPI. Then, right, as a secondary, but maybe not even secondary anymore now, is streaming, right? Streaming, and aligned with that, it was downloads, right? So last year it was downloads of the app, and now with kind of the partnership and overarching content time with Fox, right? We can see a position where ultimately BTN to go, most of that content, right, is flowing into FS, Fox Sports Go now, right? So we've dialed it down from an app download, but more of a usage download, right? Retaining those people. And now we've become a content company, right? And that's from a message from our president. So now the model is, okay, how much content can we get out there while maintaining the core principles of clearly eyeballs, streaming, but then going back to the overarching theme of maximizing our rights. So those are kind of the big pillar KPIs. You have your viewership, you have your streaming, and you have your maximizing of rights. And that's kind of what we look at every day. And that's the end goal, right? And I look at sports teams, and when I was with the Knicks in Michigan, right, you could probably tie in a little bit more community there, right, a little bit more engagement. From our end, we have a different KPI, so we have to look at it a little bit from a different lens.
But that is insane. I mean, just in your 3 years, it seems like every year there's almost a new bullseye. Going just 3 years ago, which isn't that long ago, it's viewership, and then it's streaming, and then it's download apps. I mean, it really is incredible. I think you would agree how fast this thing's moving, and what your KPI may be in 2019 and 2020. It's just a constantly moving bullseye.
And I think the next KPI, at least personally, is how do you figure out what's the social ROI, right? And then then you're trying to figure out that next KPI of, okay, year over year, we've generated X dollars from a digital and social perspective, and how much ad revenue is going towards linear versus content. And I can probably foresee in FY19 that trend to continue.
So one thing I wanted to mention, I don't think a lot of people are talking about in the news, as we've seen all these different mergers and acquisitions throughout our space. I don't think a lot of people are talking about the social element to this, because there can be a lot of different television networks that all of a sudden go under a new umbrella, but all those digital rights and all those social rights also go through that. So I just want to see if you've thought about that and what that means when a merger acquisition happens, and all of a sudden all that opportunity really from a social platform and an audience standpoint also moves over in that deal.
Yeah, I think from my end, it's a unique space, and with the recent news of Fox and the regionals, I think that's becomes clearly an important opportunity. From our end, right, we haven't really clearly needed to think about that but from an outsider looking in, it's what happens to all this ultimately if it goes through and the merger actually occurs, right? What takes place with all the regional handles, right, and all the regional social handles, and what does ultimately ESPN do with that? And does it merge under ESPN, or do they keep it in kind of their own little island? We see it from it's interesting in terms of where we are in benchmarking and comparative sets. The SEC network, right? I think that's a good example of not really a merger and acquisition, but it's a model where ESPN owns the SEC network, right? So we're battling SEC network, but they're also under the umbrella of ESPN, so they have that scale and that reach. So I think we probably apply that same model from these mergers and acquisitions. It's like, well, who's the king right now? And you're probably going to kind of roll up into whoever that king may be. And I think probably what gets lost is primarily like the voice, right? The tone and tenor of X kind of platform, right? And with the amount of people that are probably touching an account these days, Whether it's 1 to 3 to 4, and depending how big these companies are. I think that's a key of maintaining that same tone, which from our end, even as we're not going, through that, between, up to 6 people, throughout the week and at different times, managing that tone of a TV network, and not really towing the line. I think that's probably the most important piece of that conversation.
All right, so hopefully a fun question for you. What do you think in our industry, what brands, in your opinion, do you think are doing it, quote, right on social?
Yeah, I try to get out of the sports world when we talk about doing it right. I mean, the group think in sports is incredible. I think that ultimately the like-mindedness of sports is you have to remove yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, clearly I'm following what the sports world is doing and who's building creative and why are illustrations hot here and will illustrations be hot in 4 weeks? I don't know, right? Illustrations were pretty much nothing last year, and now they're the talk of the town. So I try to remove myself a little bit, at least from a Twitter perspective. Got to remove yourself a little bit from hashtag SM Sports every now and then. But I try to follow. Business Insiders is a platform that I look at a lot, just in terms of how much content they are churning.
It's crazy.
It's unbelievable, and how many accounts they have. National Geographic, again, a large scale, but not so much content because it's not clearly we can't relate to animals. But in terms of their cadence and their messaging, and I think Business Insider, I look at them of how they present their kind of the text overlays, right? Their lower thirds, and how often they're sharing and then ultimately kind of resharing that content and what that cadence looks like. But from a sports world, I mentioned Bleacher Report all the time, and probably a little bit of an unfair mention because just by the sheer resources that they have, they are, I marvel at how fast they turn content around, much like you guys.
$280 million helps that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You guys turn the content around as fast as they do. Whereas we turn around, we take pride in kind of turning around highlights as fast as anyone else. That's what we pride ourselves on. So we look in the market of, if there's a game on Fox and we have the rights, right? Is Fox Sports, are they cutting it? How fast are they cutting it? How fast is ESPN cutting it? So we need to be in that space. And one thing that, I like to look at it from maybe a different lens of, ultimately who's stealing content. That's important to us as a rights holder. And we have partnerships, but, we don't need to name names, but we understand who is stealing content, and ultimately sometimes platforms allow you to steal the content, right? They make it easy. And that's, that hurts in terms of the overall kind of pre-roll ad opportunity as, X property is stealing your content, maybe as quickly as you're getting it out there. So in the sports world, I think, I tend to rely on Bleacher often. But I think the college space, because I've been in the college space and the pro space. I think college space is just, when I was at Michigan, again, 3+ years ago, the overall landscape and the notion of digital in college has just blown up. It's been incredible. I mean, my position when I was there was a new position, and now you can go to a majority of schools and they have a digital related, position. So I think sometimes I go to college a little bit more than sometimes pro. But my wheelhouse is TV networks, such as TNT, right? And we know they're near and dear to you, but TNT for sure. And basically, what their basketball model looks like, and kind of working off of best practices from the space.
Yeah, to piggyback off your comment, I think it's really interesting because Adam Silver and the NBA said, listen, Everybody use our highlights. We don't care. That's our marketing tool. And I've actually given this example to you before, as we've talked a lot about this, is I'll see a highlight of Russell Westbrook, slamming his arm through the rim. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's Thursday. It's on TNT. Let me flip on the linear television. And that may be from House of Highlights. It may be from, some random account that I follow. So how do you guys factor that in? Because when you say steal highlights, there's also another, I guess, train of thought when the NBA is like, everybody use our stuff, and that increases our brand message essentially.
Yeah. And I again, the NBA is the top of the line when it comes to social. For us, we're in a different perspective, right? Different scale, different reach. And in terms of buying the rights, again, the overall pillar is how do we maximize those rights? And we just want to be in a position where we are ultimately having conversations with people who, platforms who may be interested in our content, right? To make that partnership, right? So we have relationships where they can use our content. But for those platforms who are not, if they have a large enough scale, right, you kind of question, okay, well, what are we doing here? And maybe, from the business development side, let's talk about opportunities where we can partner. I think if it gets excessive, that's where it's like, it's no help. Just last week, the Penn State shot at the buzzer to beat Ohio State, right? That was everywhere. That was post game. A little different when you get post game, but I think it's the wild, wild west when a brand is again sharing it not so much to promote BTN, but essentially to say, hey, we got it first, and we're going to pretend like this is our content. When that's a little bit of a different mentality than I think the NBA needs to. That's their approach, right? Because they're one of the largest, brands in the world, where we are trying to again not allow our content to be because I think another big conversation is how does it affect ultimately the beat writers and the blogs of the world, right? Where you see X blog saying, hey, this other blog is stealing all this content and we want to be able to do that, but we play by the rules and this other company doesn't. So that's a problem I think most companies have of what is that line? And we approach it where we'd like to create opportunity and work with partners versus kind of just allowing the stream to just be open and say, hey, here's our content. Do what you wish.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. There's a difference from the NBA and the rights holder. When you spend hundreds, if not billions of dollars on rights, and you see somebody else potentially leveraging that on their own, and you're not able to leverage the fact that you have the rights and make more money on digital, I can imagine if you wrote a check for a couple $100 million, that's a very frustrating thing for anybody. It's like buying a Maserati and having your neighbor take it for a spin every other day. So it makes sense.
I have no idea what that would be like, but I would love to.
I wanted to jump into this Adweek article that I was reading that's very cool with Big Ten Network, and we talked a little bit, we're pretty much in the beginning of the program, about the increased television and digital viewership. But after reading that article, I wanted you to kind of expand on that and how big of a deal that is for you guys internally.
Yeah, absolutely. So, from our end, we have created, right, and it goes back to creating more campus programming, right? So the overall pillar of rights and maximizing those rights. And so we've created these positions that have a very long title of multi-platform video producer editors, long-winded name, better acronym of MVPEs. And we've essentially said, okay, BTN has been around for 10 years. We never had boots on the ground, right? So we've created, entering this past fall, created a pilot program where we were having hiring people to be essentially a producer and an editor. Our goal was to have someone who was probably fresh out of college, who had worked in the respective kind of production departments at each school. So we ultimately chose to move forward with Penn State, Minnesota, and Michigan State. So in this pilot program, what have they been doing? They go out, we provide all the equipment. That's the investment from our end. They're a BTN employee. And the one caveat is they need to be embedded with the athletic department, right? So this is not a a newspaper or a blog, coming to a press conference here, coming to a press conference there. This person is within their walls. They are seeing them every day, clearly more than they're seeing myself. And where we are now is after a really, really successful fall and middle of winter, we hope to expand that program to 7 to 8 schools. And then that's where we get to, hey, what's the ad sales opportunity, right? Now we're selling a little bit more local, whereas from our end, we sell a little bit more national. But is there a Buffalo Wild Wings in Minneapolis? Is there a Dairy Queen, right, located in Minneapolis? And do they want more school-specific content? Because the Learfields and the IMGs of the world, right, they don't own the Big Ten rights. So, for example, if they're going to partner with Minnesota and do a Facebook campaign, it's primarily just form fields, right? Or it's a static image. They can't include video highlights. Now, is there an opportunity where we're going to the school and they're going to the client and saying, hey, we can produce school-specific video for the first time ever. So we're excited about the opportunity. Again, a pilot program. We started with 3. We're going to hopefully add 4 more before the next academic calendar year. And the great part about it is access. And it's really not football and basketball. It's actually more Olympic sports. And when we go, as we were talking earlier about tonnage, the sheer volume that we've produced, the MVPEs that have produced this type of content, it's been incredible. So we're excited about the opportunity. We're trending in the right direction. And I think, this model, we're kind of hopefully, we were first in the space, and hopefully this is a model that can be carried out at all 14 schools within the next, 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think I said this to Brian Straby on the last show, who you and I know, but you just get it, Jordan. You really do. So I think being able to consistently kick that can down the road and find different ways, yeah, it's fascinating what you guys are doing. You guys should be proud of where you are in the space. I will leave you with a random sports question. Will the XFL be something that actually pays off and can be a successful business model?
I love the 30 for 30. And as soon as that announcement was made, I jokingly made a comment to my colleagues, say, "Hey, I'm going to head to the XFL because this seems like a good long-term play." kind of jokingly. I'm optimistic. I don't know for how long, but I'm optimistic in the entertainment. And I don't know what that means for Johnny Manziel or Tim Tebow's of the world, but if they're ultimately Johnny Manziel makes is on that field for the first game. But again, as you talk about, being a difference maker and going kind of against the grain, I'm not going to question Vince McMahon.
I know. That's the thing. I agree. Well, Jordan, it's been a really good talk. I think a lot of our audience will find a lot of value from what you bring from, especially the television, the right side. It's been really cool. Stay warm. We talked earlier about the -8 degrees out there in Chicago, but really appreciate the time, man, and we'll make sure to continue this conversation soon.
Thanks, David. Stay warm in sunny San Diego.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Appreciate it. Take care.
All right, David. See ya.
All right. There he is, Jordan Maleh. He is the Digital Marketing and Communications Director at Big Ten Network. Really great conversation. I think having somebody at the television network side of things that owns the media rights, I think overall the OTT and people cutting the cord, it seems like from his standpoint, does not really scare him. It's the natural evolution of where we're going. And I really do think people in sports and live sports, when you talk about, television programs that are going to OTTs like Netflix and Hulu, maybe the NBCs and the VH1s of the world that have reality shows, maybe the OTT thing is scaring them a little bit in terms of ad revenue. But in the live sports angle, people are always going to want to watch live sports. I'm a San Diego State alum. I'm always going to watch San Diego State basketball if they have a big game or they make the March Madness tournament. So I do think the sports networks that have the rights and live sports, sure, how people consume the content may be different. It may go from the linear television down to the mobile device or the iPad, or even go from an app where you can throw it to your TV. But live sports are going to continue on in this country for hundreds and hundreds, and if not millions of years from now. So I think they're in a good spot. And I think just overall, when it comes to the algorithm as well, it's just a constant evolution. It's a constant shift in what you're able to do in that position. You got to move and groove with Mark Zuckerberg and put the puzzles of the pieces together. And we're all dealing with it in this industry, right? How do we hack Facebook? How do we hack Instagram? How do we make sure we're getting the most organic engagement with those beautiful, amazing digital billboards that are at our disposal? So it's a constant conversation. It was great to talk to Jordan from the television network side. Hope it brought value. I want to shout out producers David Furker, Auntie Lightenden as well on the keys, and we appreciate it. Business Social. We'll be back soon.